Good evening, explorers, and yeah, you read the title correctly. I have decided that I am stepping away from Into the Radius 2. Probably for a while. Why? Well, after the initial honeymoon phase enjoyment wore off and I really started to get my feet wet with the game, I came to a really shitty conclusion. I wasn't invested in the game, nor was I having fun. I made a rule when I first started tasting success with this channel that I would not force myself to do things for the sake of content. And unfortunately, that's what I caught myself doing when streaming ITR 2. And then I asked the big question, why? And it's not very complicated, it's because it's in early access. Without having at least a majority of the game's content, I can't really enjoy it the way I want to. As of right now, there are no goalposts, and it will be undergoing a constant state of radical change. That means any challenge runs done now will feel hollow, and any technical videos like the range will be outdated very quickly. So where does that leave me? Well, I'm going back to ITR 1 to tie up loose ends with the Zone series and my dreaded White Whale. There will be one more video on my co-op stream with Jaeger, but that's gonna be about it for a long time. All that being said, there's still some core issues that I have with ITR 2 aside from the general lack of content. And that's what I wanted to talk about here today, along with what the game does do well over its predecessor. Let's start with the graphics and art style. Right off the bat, I will say from a pure fidelity standpoint, ITR 2 is a big leap forward. The Radius itself looks stunning, as does the environment. Everything from the lighting to textures just looks fantastic, and I don't really have much complaint, if any, here. What I do have mixed opinions on is the art style choice from some of the changes made from ITR 1, and I think the differences in home bases encapsulates it the best. In ITR 1, we had Vano, an unofficial name for a ramshackle place. This facility was not constructed for you. It is a train yard warehouse that has been commandeered by the UNPSC to be used as a forward operating base. Shipping containers once used to move cargo and commercial goods now houses you and your fellow explorers. Or at least it used to. During 61's journey, he was always alone here, isolated, and yet it always felt like home. A place for people to gather and live. They did the best with what they had to bring what little sense of comfort they could, despite their seemingly hopeless situation. Vano was an oasis of normality from the corrupted and fractured Pechorsk exclusion zone. Now, in ITR 2, we have Facility 27, a complex seemingly built from the ground up to house and supply explorers. Highly advanced sensors and landmines line the thick concrete walls.
Do I look like I know what a JPEG is?
Stepping through the imposing reinforced gate, we see a facility map and 3 buildings: the command room, the commissary, and the barracks. Each one of these places feels so new and sterile. We are likely the first to utilize it for its intended purpose, and as a result, Facility 27 is a blank slate, a place with no history. Although, I think that this is supposed to be a reflection of the changes within the UNPSC. That being, it is likely a better funded organization as a result of the events in ITR 1. Ultimately though, Facility 27 just lacks the character that made Vano feel so special as a home. Another aspect of the art style that is affected by the changes is the equipment. Instead of brass casings to detect anomalies, we have mini plastic reels. Instead of this robust yet analog-looking detector, we have this more compact plastic-looking one. Instead of using ammo from some generic Eastern European factory, the UNPSC manufactures their own in a simple color-coded fashion. Even our uniform is UNPSC branded instead of the generic Gorka 61 used in the first game. I definitely believe that all of these changes are for narrative purposes, but I still just don't really like it. When I walk into a decrepit old house and find brand new, clean boxes of UNPSC ammo and gear and loose crackers, it just kinda reminds me that I'm playing a video game. Which, for a series like ITR, where one of its greatest strengths is immersion, that kinda sucks. Something I think would be a good idea is to add the old equipment and ammo as lootable gear out in the Radius. Make it functional and work in place of the new gear, but with slight differences for variety. For instance, maybe you can make scavenged ammo from the old factory do more damage at the cost of wearing down your gun quicker, or something to that effect. The next thing I wanted to talk about is the entities. Visually, this is also a mixed area for me. Instead of the fucking shadow demons, we are fighting something that somewhat resembles a human. They wear relatively normal-looking clothing and uniforms, but their faces are a little off, with some just cresting the uncanny valley and others falling to the bottom of it. Their weapons are super interesting. Like with some of the loot you can find, their guns look like they were trying to do mitosis but failed midway. It's a cool visual that further demonstrates the Radius' tendency to try to copy or mimic reality, but ultimately failing. This particular new art direction is something that I actually really like and adds some depth to the world and the Radius itself. Now, I know I said this was a mixed area for me, and it ultimately comes down to the glowing faces. I just don't really like it. It makes them way too easy to spot and takes away some of their spook factor. An ideal fix for this would be to delegate it to a difficulty option, I think. Besides that, I think the new mimics are great overall. Maybe except for the whole bodies floating into the air thing. It's cool and kind of funny, but again, it's one of those things that negatively impacts immersion for me. Oh, and I almost forgot, our boy Pecho got a glow up, and now he's got scissor hands. I'm pretty indifferent to this, at least artistically speaking. Moving on to the artifacts and anomalies, I think these are good changes across the board. The anomalies all look better than their ITR1 counterparts and can create some cool and yet equally terrifying visuals. The artifacts drastically changed, and now instead of being weird glowing shapes, we have weirdly shaped rocks. Okay, yeah, that's not really an improvement, except for the mission artifacts, which most of them are interactable in some way, and are basically anomalous fidget toys. And like mentioned before, a new type of anomalous loot you can find are these corrupted items. This is a really cool addition. Please, give us more of this kind of stuff. And finally for this section, I think the Tide is really cool now. They remind me a lot of emissions from Stalker, and I think it's fantastic. The fact that all of this happens seamlessly without a loading screen is awesome and does wonders for my immersion. I especially appreciate the glowing specks that start to fall leading up to the Tide. I think it's a great early warning indicator. Artistically, that's about all I have to say. Now, let's move on to the gameplay. Right now things are pretty bare bones with there only being 2 maps, 2 entities, and a handful of unique missions. Right off the bat though, I love the mimics. Their AI was pretty good in the first game, but now they feel even better. Their movements are sometimes hard to predict, and they are addicted to using cover, so hitting them is a lot harder most of the time. They also suppress you while in cover, basically putting their magical NPC bottomless ammo supply to good use, and will continue to shoot at the spot where they last saw you. This means if you try to re-peek an angle immediately, you might catch a bullet to the face the moment you pop back up. Spawns are a bit of a mixed bag. It's cool that they're a lot more threatening now with their increased accuracy and aggression. However, they are a bit of a pain to deal with. By far the easiest way to kill them is to shoot them when they briefly pause before an attack. If they do get their attack off, then you can also dodge it by crouching at the right time or simply breaking their line of sight. The real danger they pose is in groups. The best way I've found to fend them off or lose them entirely is by running into the thickest piece of forest you can find. This will both mess with their pathfinding and also make it difficult for them to attack you. Overall, I think I like these guys a bit more than the ITR1 spawn, just because old spawns didn't really pose a threat. Unless you were arachnophobic, then they would just do psychological damage instead of physical. Also, the fact that they chill in buildings to ambush you now is a great detail. There he is. Right fucking there.
That little crap.
So now you know that if you hear a typewriter noise in the building, you got one of these little bastards to deal with. You're welcome.
Oh, just for that, I'm shotgunning this guy.
Please do. Oh my god, he exploded. Gameplay-wise, anomalies are a little bit on the iffy side, and it primarily comes down to reflectors for me. Despite having a visible core, I run into these things constantly, and it's just kind of annoying. They are literally everywhere, and if you aren't taking a magnifying glass and inspecting every inch of ground, you will run into them a lot. I get that the whole point is to try to make you pay attention to the world around you, but I swear, even when I'm scanning for these things, I still hit them. I know they have an audio cue for when they're near, but it's either so indistinct that my brain always dismisses it as background noise, or the sound just doesn't play at all. This combined with the cores being obstructed by objects or grass most of the time, and it just gets frustrating. Personally, I think they need their spawn rate significantly reduced. Like, just have that shit.
The thing with the pokey chair, I'm not sure what it's called, has essentially replaced the distortion anomaly. And I'm pretty indifferent to it. It's a little less annoying to deal with since it's always visible. The electric anomalies, like in the first game, are the scary ones. Not only are they invisible most of the time, but they can also move in a patrol pattern. This alone makes anomaly fields a lot more dangerous since you can't just sit in one spot and expect to be safe when they're around. Oh, and portals. I don't really like their current implementation. Even when they are working properly, they just feel so derived. Like, they really scream video game shit, which is bad for immersion. I still like the idea of being able to have these one-way shortcuts though. So I think a good potential change would be to have doorways in buildings lead to other doors inside of completely different buildings. I think that this would be a much more seamless way to integrate the mechanic than just to have these floating portals everywhere.
Artifacts are another mixed area. Like in ITR 1, there are loot artifacts, there are mission artifacts, and there are practical artifacts, we'll call them. The major mechanical difference is the practical ones will no longer have active effects, only passive ones. Or at least they will. At the time of making this video, I don't know if they've been implemented, or at least I haven't found any. But basically, it's a system more similar to Stalker than ITR, or at least that's how it reads. I'm personally not a big fan of this direction. I think having actual artifacts that you can use and visually see their effect on the world is way cooler than just stat bonuses. Although, to be fair, we'll have to wait and see how this one pans out. And now, let's talk about combat. This is my biggest gripe with Into the Radius 2, right behind some of the art style changes. ITR 2 commits what is, in my opinion, a grave VR sin. That is, making my avatar do things that are out of my control.
What I'm referring to is the aim sway you get while walking or running. Nothing annoys me more than this when playing VR.
I get that you want to force a slower and more tactical playstyle, but this is not the way to do it. I would much rather just receive a spread multiplier than for my gun to just start doing whatever the fuck it wants to in my hand. This especially affects shooting with iron sights since it makes it almost impossible to maintain sight picture while moving. And to tag onto that, the guns in general just feel so heavy and difficult to maneuver, especially rifles. This is likely to make the guns feel more real and immersive.
Pause. After some more hands-on time with two-handed weapons, I'm gonna backtrack on this one. I don't think the weightiness was an attempt to make the guns feel more real. I think it was to reduce how shaky the weapon can feel in your hands. Since there is some light inertia to it, you don't get that aggressive wobble that you did in ITR 1. Basically eliminating the need for the old focus mechanic. Plus, I think the sluggishness has been tuned down a bit since I last played. It feels a bit better now. So yeah, I mostly take back what I was about to say. Still, fuck weapon sway though. Shit straight garbanzo beans.
One last thing for this section, playing ITR 2 made me realize just how important enemy and combat variety is for the game. Dealing with the same enemies in the same manner repeatedly made the gameplay loop dull really fast. Obviously, this isn't really a criticism, more of an observation, as more entities will be added to the game later. Please, please, please bring back melee weapons though. I am severely missing their inclusion. Anyway, that's about all I have to say. CM Games, I hope this doesn't put me on your naughty list, but I wanted to be upfront and honest about my experience. I will come back to ITR 2 when it's ready, but until then, it looks like I'm getting back on that Stalker mod grind, or maybe some other challenges. Also, sorry for not posting in like a month. This video was a struggle to make. It went through like 4 different iterations and revisions because every single time I came back to it, my opinions on things would change. Overall though, even though this is a generally negative outcome for me and my channel, the silver lining is that with the PlayStation port of ITR 1 coming out, we are about to have a new flood of people into the community, meaning it would be in my best interest to finally finish the Zone series. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on ITR 2 down in the comments below. Until next time, explorers.